having a conversation for like an hour, and I think 4 or 5 people came up to Mert and were like, "Hey Mert, I'm so-and-so. We think that Heliuss is such an important company. Would you invest in mine?" And meanwhile, they don't know that Mert's actually talking to a VC.
Why do you think the first round was so hard?
You're not going to tell a girl like, "Hey, I know you're only 6'5" guys, but I'm 4'3", and maybe you can change your mind because I'm really great or something. It's just not going to happen.
This guy is super loud and super opinionated.
By that time, I had got rejected like 12, 13 times, I believe. One of the weird things about Solana, the data is encoded in like machine format in a sense, so that it's like travels easily or efficiently over the wire, which is good for performance, but it's horrible for readability.
For any blockchain, the most important user is the developer.
A few weeks later, Solana went from like $30 to like $140 or something much bigger. And then I was like, okay, now everybody can raise anyways.
Hey, I'm Regan Bozman, host of the Token Warrant. Really excited to be joined by Mert from Helius and Breck from Haun. Guys, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Well, really excited to dive into Helius, its role in Solana. Mert, I feel like you've been one of the main characters of this cycle, so it's awesome to have you on. But Breck, maybe if you want to start with you and just give an introduction to like how you got into crypto, Haun, what type of stuff you invest in, and we can go from there.
Yeah, totally. Maybe I'll start with just Haun Ventures because a lot of people don't know too much about us. We're a crypto fund that was founded about 2.5 years ago, and we're in the middle of deploying our first set of funds. We've got an early stage fund where we spend the bulk of our time. It's a $500 million fund, and then we've got a $1 billion growth fund that supports that. I joined the team right after the first close, so 2.5 years ago, and I'm actually an engineer by trade. So spent the 5 years before getting into investing as a back-end crypto engineer working on a bunch of different startups. Originally got into the space in college and worked on a cross-border payments app with some friends from college. And we were building on the Stellar blockchain at the time. This was like early 2018, 2017. And we were focused on making mobile money applications interoperable in East Africa. Ended up leaving that after college and went to Coinbase, where I was for 2 years, building out a lot of the crypto primitives that allow the different products at Coinbase to actually do stuff on different chains. And then during the pandemic, as Coinbase went from a couple hundred employees to a few thousand employees remote, I wanted to go work on an early stage startup again. And so I went to Zora, where I was the first hire, and built out a lot of our back-end engineering primitives. So if you were a developer and wanted to use the Zora smart contracts, you needed to use our, indexers, APIs, SDKs, things that I built, and did that for about a year and a half. And that allowed me to start building relationships with founders that were, relying on Zora. And so I started doing some angel investing that way. And, when I was spending my nights and weekends meeting with founders and kind of being annoyed that I had to come back to my computer and start writing code, I started to realize like maybe investing is something that I should pursue full time. And so, yeah, about 2.5 years ago, I made the move over to Haun Ventures.
I mean, out of curiosity, is that like spending less time, doing like real work, meeting with founders? Like, has that kind of like lived up to what you hoped it would?
Yeah, it's very different. My perception of what it meant to be a venture investor as an engineer is very different than I think what it actually is day in and day out. A lot of people ask me, because you're a former engineer, does that help you be a venture investor? Are you like looking in the code bases and like auditing code? And I tell flat out no. Like you wouldn't want me to do that. I haven't written code in 2 years. But B, I don't think it actually provides an advantage. I think mostly having an engineering background helps you around understanding people. So like, especially for Heliuss, like I would have been a customer of Heliuss when I was at Zora, right? We had RPC providers. We were mostly building on the Ethereum blockchain, but so like I can understand product and I can understand when I'm talking to folks that are building engineers, is this someone that are engineers, is this someone that I would want to work with, or can I understand that the way that they talk? Do I think they're a great engineering leader? And so it's more around the edges and like through product and sort of like soft skills, and it's not about like me actually applying and reading code on a daily basis. But I get that question quite a bit.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, it helps you understand people, obviously, is helpful. Yeah, Mert, would love to kick it over to you, like hear about your background, how you got into crypto, Heliuss, and we can go from there.
Sure. So the flash summary is I studied applied math and pure math and communications engineering, so like radio, satellites, and whatnot. I was going to do a PhD in theoretical physics, and for some reason, that's kind of when I started taking advanced cryptography courses. And when I first heard about Ethereum, my roommate at the time, Liam, who's also now my co-founder, was doing some weird shit with like Regan Coin or something, and I was like, "What the hell are you guys doing?" He had some friends.
Regan Coin was like a smart contracts on Bitcoin, right?
I still don't know what it is, but we had some friends in that circle who like founded like Elements Finance, and like were early at like MakerDAO and Nansen and stuff. So was already in that circle, but at the time I didn't see the use cases to be that compelling. So I worked at Blackberry on the cloud infra team that powered BBM, and then after school I worked at like 3 of the big banks in Canada, again building cloud infra, but also like digital payments and even ATM withdrawal systems and things like that. And then I thought it was too slow, basically like the banking system, just too bureaucratic and useless. And I started working at a fintech called, I worked at a startup called Flashstock, which got acquired by Shutterstock. So that's kind of when I started to really enjoy like the startup vibe, because Toronto doesn't have a great startup scene, but this company kind of showed me how fun and interesting it could be. And then I worked at Clearbank, which at the time was, I believe, the only unicorn in Canada as a startup. And it's basically like a dilution-free funding platform in a sense. I think their thing was like the one-click term sheet or something. And so I built a lot of systems for the treasury team there for like payments and global money movement. And then basically one day I had to move money from Australia or Canada to Australia. And like, it was kind of bizarre how difficult that was. I thought it would just be like a few lines of code and you just assign some virtual card and that's it. But there was a lot of like weird regulatory things where you had to hop between jurisdictions. I was like, this is so dumb. Like, why not just use something like USDC? Because I was already, looking at crypto on my own time. And they did not like that idea. And within, I believe, 3 weeks or 4 weeks, I started Coinbase. This was before they went public. So roughly just like the week before they went public, I joined Coinbase.
We were 2 shifts passing in the night, Mert. Just missed each other.
Oh, nice. Yeah, at the time it was like a few hundred people still. But then after I joined, it went to like 3,000. Like it really grew while I was there. And at Coinbase, I was on a team called Ledger, which is actually kind of similar to what we do at Heliuss. It was APIs for Coinbase developers. So money movements, transaction histories, getting balances, portfolio charts, stuff like that. And I was kind of a tryhard, so I wanted to like study all the blockchains, read all their white papers and stuff. And I think due to like my background in communications engineering, I was like super interested in Solana's white paper. And so I started just building random, at one point Solana didn't have any block explorers or analytics sites. So I would build like indexers on my own and write some threads on Twitter and try to like FUD NFT influencers who would say like bizarre shit about like how NFTs are like selling out, but turns out they would have like 99% of the supply. At the time, I was also advocating for Solana within Coinbase as it was kind of kicking off. And like people were actually open to it. They just asked me to like handle it. And I was like, okay. And turns out that there was basically no tooling on Solana. Because like at Coinbase, you would use like Etherscan or like some other providers. But on Solana, there's just nothing. You have to do everything in-house. I had kind of this realization where I was like, okay, I was super sick of the lack of applications in crypto, even in 2021. I was like, this is not going to work. Like my family thinks I'm a joke. We're just building some weird circular shit here. And I was like, okay, probably the highest leverage thing I can do is make it easier for people to build applications and go from idea to execution like ASAP. And at first we actually started, so I quit Coinbase, started Heliuss. And at first it was actually multi-chain for like a few weeks, maybe a month. And that's when I recruited actually my co-founders, Nick and Liam, and they actually joined as engineers at first. And basically, after talking to customers, like the developers on EVM and SVM just had much different needs, and basically providing products for both of them simultaneously wasn't working. And so at a time where people thought Solana's developer market was like pretty small, I was kind of just like, you know what, we're just going to double down on this. And my reasoning at the time was pretty simple. It was like, okay, Ethereum is the best blockchain today. And it's where most of the developers are. Yet, for you to actually solve this problem of building applications, there needs to be a lot of things that need to happen. So like at the time, the merge hadn't happened. It hadn't transitioned to proof of stake. 4844 hadn't gone live. L2s hadn't really been a thing. Only Polygon was mostly a thing. And I was like, okay, every time you add this conditional, it just kind of delays the probability of success to some extent. Versus on Solana, it was like, this chain works, I built on it, but it's like super hard to build on. And so there's a clear gap to just solve that problem and make somewhat of an orthogonal impact. And yeah, and then I got Liam and Nick to kind of be my co-founders and started Heliuss from there.
Awesome context and background. I guess like maybe it's like Solana developer experience, like the broad thesis, like what was that kind of like initial product wedge in the market? And maybe like what's the full product stack today? And what's the vision you guys are building towards?
Yeah, so Solana block stores are kind of a meme today, and they've always have been. So blockchains are transparent, but transparency doesn't mean too much if nobody can understand the data underneath. And one of the weird things about Solana, or not weird, but one of the optimizations it does is like the data is encoded in like machine format in a sense, so that it's like travels easily or efficiently over the wire, which is good for performance, but it's horrible for readability. And what ends up happening is nobody understands the smart contracts that are being executed on chain. And so at first, since I had already built so many explorers or indexers and bots and stuff, I was like, I kind of know how to do this. Like you have to reverse engineer the data to match what you see on the front end and then build like these weird parsers. And so the first iteration of the company was actually human readable APIs. That's it. So we're just going to make Solana human readable. And then if we can do that, maybe we'll expand to different chains. And so that was we just had one API endpoint, and it was just parsing transactions. And surprisingly, people were already paying for that. And at the time, we actually were like, okay, we're just going to be a pure API company. And as we kind of kept building that product out, we obviously had to use RPC providers to source our data, right? Because we were kind of in the middle between the user and the RPCs, and it was kind of an enrichment layer. Basically, everybody told me that RPCs were this commodity that would never work, and it's a crowded market. And, we had all these competitors with like 10s, 20s, and I mean, Alchemy had raised at 10 billion. And so everybody told us not to do it. But then
I probably told you that too.
I don't remember if you did, but like a lot of people did. I was rejected at least, double digits for sure when I was pitching. I was like, okay, something doesn't match up here because my CTO hates the RPCs. And like, not only are they too expensive, they don't work properly. They're missing data, Solana scale, all these things. And I was like, you know what, Liam, just build RPCs this one weekend. And like, he just hacked something together. And like, it was pretty shit at first, but it still got a lot of traction. Everybody was like using us for it. Because everybody who would use us, since we own the customer relationship from the front of the stack, they'd be like, hey, do you also have RPCs that we can plug into? And then we combined that with our problems that we were having. It's like, okay, RPCs are clearly not solved. And so it was APIs, RPCs. But then as you keep owning the relationship with the developer, they complain about other things like, hey, we want to set up a notification system, but we don't want to do all these weird things. And so like, okay, let's build webhooks. And so we kind of just kept stacking things like that until we had a platform. And that was generally the evolution. And today it's a full-fledged developer platform where we have RPCs, APIs, webhooks, research, education, data. Basically, anytime you want to build anything on Solana, we have everything you need to succeed. And yeah, there's a lot of kind of other random things sprinkled in there, like validator and like some of our product expansions that are coming up, but that's the gist of it.
So we're recording this kind of in the context of like the Series B that you guys announced maybe a month ago. Can you just like cover the fundraising history at a high level? And would also just be curious, like how tied has that been to like Solana and how investors are excited about it at any given point in time when you guys have put together a round?
The first round was by far the hardest because I hadn't raised before. And that was, I believe, June 2022. And it's really weird how I got introed to this VC. It was reciprocal, Craig. Basically, I used to always be loud on Twitter, but I didn't have any followers. And one day I had read this book, Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And I followed him. And he tweeted like, what's something that nobody's talking about? And I replied just random, like Sunday night or something. I was like, well, how 70 to 80-year-olds are like considered mentally declining and can't get any job, but they're exclusively running the country. And when I came back, it somehow went viral. And it was on like the front page of Reddit and all this shit. And another family office VC from New York started following me. And so he messaged me, and then we were just talking, we became friends. And then he's like, hey, I have a guy I can introduce you to that also invests in Solana. And by that time I had got rejected like 12, 13 times, I believe. And then, you know, there's obviously all these conversations and like, hey, once you get a lead, we can talk and stuff like that. I didn't really know how the game was played back then. But Reciprocal was interested right away. And I was pretty surprised by that. Like he was basically like finishing my sentences. And then I was also talking to Chapter 1 at the time, and they were also interested. So we basically had them co-lead the seed, and that was a $3.1 million seed. And then we had like a bunch of, you know, strategics like Haun Ventures and whatnot. Fast forward, FTX happened. And a lot of people were basically telling us like, hey, is this the right idea? You know, there's no developers here. There's memes going around about 75 developers and stuff. And basically I was like, we're going to double down on this because the fundamentals are actually getting better. This is just kind of this short-term Twitter narrative. And like, I'll just go fight that because it's not true. And we were already doing well at this point. Like, I don't think we were profitable, but we were certainly making money and getting a lot of traction. But there was still like a pretty big asymmetry in the venture market, let's say. Like Solana teams weren't getting funded. I also angel invest, so I would like try to help some of these teams myself, which is how I got into angel investing. And I was like, okay, you know what? We're doing like well. And so what I'm going to do, this was before last breakpoint, 2023 in Amsterdam. I was like, okay, we're just going to raise now so that we can prove to the market that Solana teams can raise. And then so other teams like my customers and stuff can also raise after that using it as a signal, probably. It's funny. We talked to Foundation. We talked to a bunch of people. This round was much easier because I had already, I'm not sure why actually, like we had good numbers, good growth, but also people already knew who I was. So it was much easier this time. In fact, we got a term sheet in like 3 days maybe, and kind of just got multiple at the time. Yeah, we raised 9.5 from Foundation Capital. And then we had like 6-man ventures in the round as well. And pro rata from like, you know, Chapter 1 and Reciprocal again. And a few weeks later, Solana went from like $30 to like $140 or something much bigger. And then I was like, okay, now everybody can raise anyway. So I kind of just, whatever. And so that was that. And then this last round, for some reason seems to be the fuzziest because like I hadn't actually planned on raising at first. Basically, I was talking to Anatoly, and so like Solana did this split between like Solana Labs and Anza and all. They kind of just did the separation of concerns, and I kind of noticed that like L2s were kind of kicking off and becoming much more of a deal, and I think like the roadmap was being executed pretty well. And we were growing and already profitable and already had good revenue numbers and whatnot, number one validator on Solana. And basically, the motivation behind this one was like, I don't think Solana has that much of a moat. And I tell this story all the time where I'm like, in the future, every chain is going to be fast and cheap. And so this is not going to do anything. Like this, we only have a small window here to really accelerate and build these tools and kind of win on features and content and differentiators as opposed to just being fast. And so basically I was like, okay, I have a lot of ideas I want to build and execute on, and we need more engineers. We need some high quality partners and supporters who understand this as well, who can help us with everything from regulatory to B2B sales and all this. And at the time I was just talking casually. I think I met Breck in New York in person. And like, I didn't have a raise really on my mind. But then we kind of just kept talking, and I was like, okay, maybe like it's interesting to kind of start doing somewhat more of an official process. Breck was super like helpful in thinking about the company and like the growth and like different product lines or like future plans and stuff. And he wasn't even an investor. And I was like, okay, like that's a good partner to have. And so kind of just stack those together, and then like, we're like, okay. And then so basically we just started talking to, I believe I went to Palo Alto to talk with Breck and the team. And at that time I had just met Diogo because I was in like Portugal, and there's a lot of conferences. So there was a lot of like run-ins and like stuff like that. And so it kind of arose much more naturally this time, where it was just kind of like based off an existing relationship. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, congrats on getting it done. And I definitely want to like dive into this round and, hear Breck's perspective. Maybe like taking it back a step, like why do you think the first round was so hard? Was it like you were just like, you hadn't done this before? Was it like questions on like the market size around Solana?
So I think two things. Yeah. One is that I was certainly inexperienced. I mean, I've reviewed hundreds of decks since then and done a lot of pitches since then. So certainly I don't think I was doing it properly, but also, yeah, like it wasn't an obvious bet. In fact, it was relatively contrarian because, again, a Solana only infrastructure team in the Solana market, where the market for developers is not very large, was not something, and like a space that like APIs where people think it's like a commodity. So you kind of combine those three things, like shitty market size, kind of a commoditized product, plus like first time founder. I don't think that was super compelling. And so that was for sure like the most difficult part. But I was pretty like arrogant, I would say, to a fault, where I was like, yeah, like these guys just don't know what they're talking about. Like I think I had read like 0 to 1 for like the fourth time before the raise. And I was like, no, like Peter Thiel told me like this is how it's supposed to be, whatever. And you just need to go for like a market that you think will grow. It doesn't have to be big right now. And I'm pretty sure it's going to grow. And so that was kind of like the bet. And one of the things that like I like to tell founders is it's kind of like dating. Like you're never going to convince a VC to change their thesis on something off a pitch meeting. You kind of have to find people who are already interested or think along the same lines to some extent, and then just find them. It's like sales, right? Do they actually need this product? Do they actually have these needs? Whatever. It's like you're not going to tell a girl like, hey, I know you're only 6'5" guys, but I'm 4'3", and maybe you can change your mind because I'm really great or something. It's just not going to happen. And it's kind of like the same thing with investors and pitching, I find. And so at the time, not a lot of people had a good Solana thesis. And so it was hard to find those people.
Yeah, like you did the Venn diagram of people who were like willing to take this contrarian bet and people who were excited about Sol. I guess maybe taking it forward to this round, like Breck, would love to hear your perspective. Like, how did you guys meet Mert? Had you been like following Helius and Solana at the time? Like, and yeah, just like how did this round kind of come together on your end?
Totally. Playing it back, I think I reached out to Mert cold outbound, like in sometime in the middle of 23. Maybe it was early 23. It's a little fuzzy on the details. And the like observation was like, this guy is super loud and super opinionated, and he has a lot of developer connectivity within the Solana ecosystem. And so we should just get to know each other. I think at the time Mert had just started Lightspeed, and so it was honestly pretty generous with his time and accepted my cold outbound. And we just kind of started talking, learning more about each other, learning a little bit more about the business. And for, the next like 18 months or so, we were just always, whenever something came up on Solana that was interesting, I would shoot it to him, he would shoot it to me, and we just kind of built a like personal relationship that way. This is not through the like investor founder relationship. Then Mert's right. Earlier this, like, we never met before in person, and earlier this year, as Solana was kind of going bananas in the spring, we both happened to be in New York at the same time. Met at got coffee at News Bar in Union Square, which is like, for some reason, a mecca for crypto founders in New York. I feel like when you go there,
I'm in New York right now. I should go by there later and see what comes of it.
It's literally a revolving door for everyone who has their headquarters in Union Square. We got coffee there, and we started talking about a couple different things. I remember I was asking Mert a lot about some of the congestion problems with Solana, because at the time you couldn't actually land transactions, and the network was like reaching some sort of like networking and bandwidth saturation. And the saturation problems in Solana looked a lot different than saturation on Ethereum. And I thought that was like pretty interesting. And Mert was able to, share a lot about, the pain that he felt as one of the RPC providers. And I started to share a little bit to Mert about, one of our core theses at Haun Ventures, which is, investing in like bottoms up networks, or networks that rely on developer distribution. And we kind of riffed on that for a little bit. And I think we both left that conversation like pretty interested and wanting to spend more time with each other. And then fast forward to ECC. I'll never forget this, Mert. We're at a Mega ETH event. And I think at this point, Mert is like thinking a little bit more about this prompt that I gave him of what does a like developer network for Heliuss look like? Like, what does, given the fact that you've gained some sort of like trust and distribution within Solana developers, which are a super important relationship to have, like what then does that allow you to do for like act 2 of the company? And I had started thinking a lot more about what happens when Solana starts to reach some sort of saturation in terms of what the network can actually do, and like what are the like secondary effects for me as an investor to be able to, seize that opportunity and look for places to invest. And we were having a conversation for like an hour, and I think 4 or 5 people came up to Mert and were like, "Hey, Mert, I'm so and so, we think that Heliuss is such an important company. Would you invest in mine?" And meanwhile, Mert and I are having a like founder investor relation conversation, and they don't know that Mert's actually talking to a VC. And I just thought that was so funny. And like by the 4th or 5th person, Mert like honestly started rolling his eyes a little bit and was like, "Man, you see what I have to deal with now. Like these are the results of all the hard work and distribution I'd done from the Bird app." And I thought that was really funny. And from that conversation, we started to actually start to think about a round. And so, for the diligence process, we needed to reach out to a bunch of teams that were actually building on Solana to verify like what are the problems. And, Heliuss was not a first mover in the RPC space, right? They came to a space that where you had well-funded incumbents like Alchemy and QuickNode, where Solana was not the like core focus. But as Solana started to say let's say have network degradation, the ability for the generalized providers to actually provide a good service like started to deteriorate. And so as fees went up, as congestion went up, there needed to be someone else in the market to be able to like provide products for people to like make sure that their apps were not exorbitantly expensive, or like the ability to land a transaction or nerf their user experience. And so we heard from a lot of customers this like arc of, "Hey, I actually started using QuickNode, but because I'm an NFT provider, it was too expensive to issue NFTs. And so with NFT compression, I started using Heliuss." Or, the spring when it was impossible to land a transaction and Heliuss actually was first to implement stake-weighted QoS, we actually moved over to Heliuss. And I felt, or I started to hear that conversation, or that sort of like customer track from a bunch of different folks. It was like wallets, it was social products, it was exchanges, it was depend. Like no matter what, Heliuss was kind of like at the center of this like progression. As Solana was breaking, Heliuss was emerging as an infrastructure provider. When you hear that consistently, like across a diverse set of customers, it's really interesting. And then you pair that with this like potential opportunity as Heliuss goes deeper and deeper down the stack, closer to the protocol. We got pretty excited about wanting to invest in this company. And we already had conviction in Mert and Liam and Nick and the team over there. And so we were just trying to validate the market a little bit more. And so it kind of came together pretty opportunistically. I think Mert alluded to this, but there wasn't really much of a process. And if I reflect a little bit more on like a lot of the investments that I've made, they've been on the back of a relationship with the founder that's been cultivated over, a period of time. And so there wasn't like hey, Breck, I'm now raising my Series B. Like, do you want to participate? It was a conversation that we had been having for a couple of months about the future of the business. And I think that allowed both myself and Mert to build conviction in each other and what it would be like to have like, true partnership here. And so that's a little bit about the like process on our end.
It's an awesome background. I feel like maybe, I don't know, Mert did some planting of getting all these compliments paid to him when he was talking to VCs. It would have been
it was a mega event.
Dude, it's so funny. I was like,
maybe some of the Solana people stuck in.
Did you pay this person to come and like one person wasn't even asking them to invest, but they're like, Heliuss is the greatest product on earth. And I think Mert looked at me and was like, yo, I swear I didn't do this. It was really funny. It was cool.
I mean, it's a strong testament. You mentioned this notion of like bottoms up networks that start with developers. Can you like unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think, for any blockchain, the most important user is the developer. And oftentimes in our industry, people get so excited about an architecture that we think maybe is optimized or better. And we go the approach of trying to introduce a product by saying that we have a better architecture. And we try to shove it down the throats of people. I won't name or pick out anyone in particular, but I think a lot of the stuff that's happening in the Ethereum L2 ecosystem with shared sequencing is a good example of that. Just like, hey, we think that this is an abstract problem. This is a better way of doing things. Now use our thing. And, the history of startups shows that that's not how things work. You have to build a product for a, fairly acute developer pain point. And you have to build trust with them and you have to build distribution. And I think what Heliuss has done is like sort of over the course of time, Solana is a very difficult blockchain to use for a myriad of reasons. And, they started with human readable APIs, then they went to RPCs, then they went to NFT compression, and they picked off these individual customers. And that compounded over time to give them distribution. And you pair that with Mert's CAC, right? Like Mert tweets and there are dozens of thousands of impressions. I think the net new Solana developer doesn't even think about going to another provider. They go to Heliuss. And so there's created this like, this rolling thunder of, if you're a Solana developer, you probably have Heliuss somewhere in your stack. And that means that as your needs and the complexities of using Solana continue to increase, and if Heliuss provides a new product to solve that problem, you're likely to at least try it. And I think that that's super important. And so, I think there's also let's take a step back as well. And I think that there's this interesting observation when you look up the history of blockchain networks where very few of them have actually hit a point of saturation, right? Like, I think Bitcoin has been at sustained saturation for quite some time. Ethereum L1 has, and then now Solana has with this like bandwidth and networking constraints. And so when that happens, I don't think the network underlying is actually equipped to solve those problems very quickly for developers, right? Like Ethereum has not scaled fast enough, and that's why we have a rich L2 ecosystem. I think Solana, though it moves faster, will not be able to move fast enough to solve its problems. And so that's created an opportunity for someone like Heliuss to, sort of like intercept that relationship with the developer and solve that problem from a product perspective. And what that looks like is the like expectations and needs of the user of the network and the ability for the network to actually like move fast enough and solve that problem start to like diverge. And I don't know what the actual right phrase is, but it feels like the innovator's dilemma for blockchain networks. Yeah. And so like when I hear that and I see that Solana is starting to break a little bit, or at least get to the point of saturation, and I see a team that has that has built up this trust and distribution with the developers, you can't help but think that there's like fertile ground for more products and an exciting opportunity to solve more developer problems. And we've invested behind that like kind of thesis, not just with Helius and Solana, but we have a couple of other investments in our portfolio that look kind of similar. Conduit is an example of that. Chaos Labs is an example of that. And then most recently, Bridge, which got acquired by Stripe last week, also kind of fits that profile where they solve a specific pain point for an important developer, build that trust and distribution, and then there's opportunity from there to sort of like build a network or continue to go deeper down that customer's problem set. And so I think we've been pretty excited about investing behind this idea. And we haven't heard similar theses or ideas from other firms in this space. And so I kind of walked Mert through that idea maze back in New York, and that sort of started our conversation.
Yeah, it's an interesting view on the market. But when you draw it out, it makes sense. We talked a lot about Solana, this kind of network congestion being like a tipping point where it's like clear there's a lot of demand for the network. I mean, Mert, on your end, like, would love to understand kind of what kept you convicted after FTX in Solana's growth. And then maybe you mentioned kind of like the mode and wanting to build that going forward. Like, where do you see Solana relative to the rest of the ecosystem going forward? What do you think its biggest challenges are? And like, what role does Helius play in that?
Yeah, so for the first question, what kept me convicted in Solana was, I guess, maybe two or threefold. One is that we had already done the work to understand how the system works. So me and my co-founders actually all did the same undergrad program, communications engineering. And so we already knew how Solana worked, at least at somewhat of a high level. And the historical outages, for example, had previously happened due to how kind of block production works and how the leader kind of rotates. And then once you know who the leader is, you kind of DDoS that person. And so there was all these very straightforward problems. Now, they're not straightforward when you're, let's say, a trader on Twitter and you're kind of just like hearing what influencers say about it. But if you actually went through the code and understand what happens here, it was a straightforward engineering problem. And what you need to do is you need to add spam mitigation. And so Solana had already reworked the networking protocol to use Quick, QUIC. There was already talks of Stateway QoS and all these bunch of other things. That was already basically going live when FTX happened. And so we were like, okay, the tech is actually improved. So the blockchain is actually going to function better. And we were already seeing this in tests. So the fundamentals had actually improved. So if you were just ignored Twitter and you just looked at, let's say, the GitHub, you would already understand that the blockchain was in a better spot than it was before. Now that's a very hard, because people get emotional around some of these things, but we were not emotional. Number two is like, we have these customers and like, so there's like this meme that went viral, like 4,000 likes about Solana having 75 developers and all the developers are left. And we were like, but we have over like triple that in terms of paying customers per month. So like, why are these people just like, the numbers are wrong? And then the third is like, I'm obviously terminally on Twitter. And so I'm able to kind of, let's say, have a gut feel for when people are kind of just talking their book versus when they're talking with rational arguments about what's true and what's false and something constructive. And so you kind of put all those things together. And my actual honest first reaction to FTX, which I don't think like anybody shared for some reason, I was like, oh, this is amazing. Because at the time, everybody or the main criticism of Solana was actually that it was a very predatory chain where you would just like launch a token and then FTX would just shit on you, or like Alameda and stuff. And it was like predatory tokenomics. And I was like, okay, now that these guys are gone, it's going to be much more friendly for new developers and people who want to release tokens to kind of play around on the chain. No, but and then I went on Twitter and it was like the meme where you kind of come with the box of pizza and then everything's on fire. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess people don't see it that way, but like I'm pretty sure this is true. So that was kind of the FTX thing. That I actually think that was quite of an easy play. I think people just got very emotional for some reason. And then like obviously you need to put in some work against the inertia to counteract that momentum. So at the time we threw the biggest community hackathon in Solana. It was like a few $100,000 sponsored by like Helius. I set it up. I set up like this developer DAO on Solana called Lamport DAO. We did like these airdrops with Bonk to developers to like make sure they could still run their businesses. And so, you obviously had to do a lot of low level work to push through that. And then obviously reply guy. Okay. Obviously. So that's number one. Yeah. Number two is like, how do we see Heliuss's role going forward? Or I think maybe the second question was something like, how do we think about Solana as an ecosystem? And
you mentioned like Solana needing to build a moat and like every blockchain trending towards being fast and cheap. How do you see that playing out long term? Or sorry, ignore long term. Let's just talk about like a 5-year period.
Yeah, so I think fundamentally what most people in crypto have gotten wrong is they fall in love with the tech and then they try to work upwards from the tech into finding use cases. So like,
top down.
It's very backwards in how it's kind of reasoned about. Whereas what you probably want to do is like, okay, what use cases make sense for this product? Maybe it's a market or maybe it's an order book. And then you work backwards from that. It's like, okay, does the order book need to be on chain? Or are these payments, how global are the payments? Like what are the requirements of the business that actually need to be met here? And then you work backwards from those, and then the right technology should be kind of fitted towards that problem. Versus it's actually been the opposite so far in crypto, where it's like, we'll probably need interoperability between all these chains, and we'll probably also need this thing and some this in future and stuff. And it's all like hypothetical conditionals that chain together to find a use case versus just looking at the use case and now working backwards from there. And then, so you look at it. So like when people talk about like modular monolithic, I'm like, first of all, that's a marketing term because I know the guy who came up with the term. He's very good, but it's not a real thing. What actually matters is the use case and what use cases benefit from different architectures, right? And so some use cases that arose on Solana were like, at the time, like for example, Tensor was coming out and it was like Blur, like high frequency NFT trading in a sense. And I was like, okay, this probably makes much more sense to do on Solana because it's composable, it's low latency, and people can use that state to build other types of apps using that state. And so the state itself has a moat. And so this architecture makes sense for this. And I don't think Solana is like, I think totally like messages in a troll way. And I'm like, stop doing this to him all the time, where it's like, we just need one chain to like host everything. But it's like, no, what we actually need is like, we need to be the best at solving particular use cases. And those particular use cases might be like order books or like, he says on-chain NASDAQ to his credit. So like the price discovery, market, stuff like that. I think that makes sense. And so that's number two. And then number three is like what Heliuss's role in this is. This is another thing where like totally trolls us, where it's like Solana's job is to make transactions very fast, meaning like you send transactions and it's cheap and fast. Everything else is left to the reader as an exercise. It's like what a math prof would say if they're writing like a complicated proof. And that's kind of what it is. So like when you have super fast writes on a blockchain, that means a few things. That means a lot of data. It means an accelerated growth of data as well. It's not just the data's sheer size, but its rate of growth. The unstructured or machine code kind of format of Solana transactions also makes reading the data much harder. And so there's a lot of problems that arise from that one design choice. And Solana Core can't fix that, nor should they. And so we kind of just look at since we own the developer relationship with the customer from the top of the stack, look, okay, what problems are these guys facing? So one example is we weren't really interested in perfecting sending transactions to the network. We're like, okay, we just need to make reading the data very cheap, fast, accessible. But then congestion happened. And then it's like, okay, developers literally cannot use the blockchain to send transactions. Okay, how do we fix that? And then I was like, okay, well, Safeway QoS is something that might come up in a few weeks or months, whatever. And one thing is Solana has these things called local fee markets, which aren't really implemented because there's no fee APIs. So I was like, Liam, just build a fee API. So he built that, and now that's probably the most used one on Solana. But then two was like, with Safeway QoS, how it works is you get bandwidth on the network in proportion to the amount of stake that you have as a validator. And so like, we're not a validator company. We're not a validator as a service. We're not Blockdaemon, Figment, or anything like this. But we needed that stake to help developers land transactions. And so like, okay, we'll just actually, we have a problem. We're going to solve the problem. And how we're going to do that is we're going to start a validator. And so we started a validator, and then within 3 months, we were number one validator on Solana. And that also like is a big testament to like the amount of trust that we've been able to, let's say, earn through just skin in the game, like, and advocating for the chain relentlessly. And so going forward, it's basically just that, which is like, there will be problems that are unique that will result in, let's say, it's like a city, right? Like where the city maybe provides the fundamental infrastructure, like roads or something, or like says how it should be done, but then maybe when it actually comes time to build those roads, it's like, who's going to build the best roads? Then it's totally philosophies like, it's a free market, compete for it, it's capitalism. And if we are only focused on these set of challenges, we're generally able to compete much better and actually win those deals.
One model that I think about this, Regan, is like on the Solana defensibility piece is, I think the most important, like top of funnel for a blockchain is asset issuance. And right now Solana is the like primary place for new assets to come online. And the second thing from there is going to be the orchestration of those assets, whether that be payments or exchange, trading, swapping use cases. Yeah. And you know, as that like liquidity flywheel like starts to kick off when there's more issuance, which is kind of what we're seeing on Solana, the network has like a kind of a ceiling on what it can actually support. And that's where I think that provides opportunity for a company like Heliuss to be able to jump in and make the experience of using the underlying network better for those use cases. As soon as, you know, to Mert's point, as soon as these new fast, cheap blockchains come online and Solana is not differentiated there and the user experience for Solana starts to become degraded, that's when you might see people opt to move away. And so I think of Heliuss's mandate, and the thing that Heliuss does really, really well is serving that customer that wants to issue new assets and orchestrate new assets on a fast and cheap chain. Default's going to be Solana, and they're sort of like holding things together and you know, providing a simple developer experience. As soon as that changes, people may start to default or think about using another chain. But I think so far as it is right now, like Heliuss is doing a great job of sort of like providing a simple and easy to use developer product for those types of customers.
The other thing I would say is we generally think, or at least I do, of Solana as an implementation detail. Like, it doesn't really matter what the chain underneath is. Like, I don't care what it's called. Our mission is, or our problem statement, let's say, is, or the thing that annoys me is the lack of useful applications. And that's the problem we're trying to solve. It's like, how do we get more useful applications? Well, you need to provide the best developer experience. And developer experience in crypto is slightly different than Web 2, where it's not just, you know, it needs to be cheap and be reliable. It needs to be all those things, but it also needs to be on a platform where you can compose, because composability is like a unique selling point of crypto, like valuable state, hotspots, markets, stuff like that. And so, okay, if you put all those into, let's say, some equation, what is the solution that encompasses all those things? We think that's Solana. And it has a lot of shortcomings in other aspects, but those are solvable engineering problems, right? Like, we don't want to have our job be like, we need to sell this chain to institutions or something. It's like, no, we actually want to sell building crypto applications to people, and we happen to think this is the best place. And you can see, if you do our jobs right, you can see that in the end product where it actually is the best developer experience.
I like that approach. I mean, it's much less dogmatic, I think, than the way a lot of the people have approached building products. But I think you're right in that at some point beyond like core industry participants, no one cares what blockchain is what, right? It's a question of like what you want to accomplish. This was an awesome conversation. We're almost at time, but yeah, really appreciate both of y'all coming on.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. And we'll add Twitter's in the show notes. Mert maybe already has all the followers, but Breck, we can get you some more. Yeah, guys, thanks again for coming on and taking the time.
Appreciate it.